Ufuk studied history and philosophy at Humboldt University in Berlin and also spent time at Harvard, UCLA, Yale, and at the University of Virginia, several American universities. In his dissertation, he offers a contemporary reading of an important text of Islam's humanistic tradition, that is Miskaway's Tahdhib al-Akhlaq, the refinement of virtues. In fact, this already gives an indication that Ufuk actually belongs to the new field of Islamic theology, that has been created at German universities since 2011. Today, Ufuk will talk about Hermann Cohen. Title of his talk is Reading the Theology of the Other, Engaging with Hermann Cohen's Religion of Reason. And my hunch is that Hermann Cohen does play a role here because just like Islamic theology today, which wants to establish Islamic thinking as an academic field in Germany, so Hermann Cohen was doing something similar with Judaism at the turn to the 20th century. But the field is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Frank, for this kind invitation. It's wonderful to have you with me here on the panel. I feel obliged to step into the words that you said towards the end of the panel discussion, to tell the truth. Who else than the German scholar can tell you the honest truth? So before I do what you expect a German scholar to do, I want to thank Luke for the invitation and bringing us all together. And I'm not trying to be merely polite, although every time I come to the UK, I feel this inexplicable urge to be polite all the time. I hope you don't mind me saying, but coming from Germany, to me it feels like I'm in the tent of the Great British Bake Off. And the only thing missing is Paul Hollywood coming around the corner and giving me the handshake. So, in Germany, I'm actually quite curmudgeon-y, if you believe it. I guess I blend in beautifully. What I want to say is thinking together about reconfiguration of humanism is such an important event, timely and extremely relevant. And I believe it has to go beyond, and this is happening here, which makes me very happy, beyond the sort of surface level engagement with one another. I believe it is crucially important to really understand the other, to understand the way how the other is thinking, to intellectually appreciate the way others are thinking. And we may not be able to fully incorporate the other's standpoint in our hearts and in our minds, but I do believe that going the extra mile to understanding the way how somebody else is trying to configure the understanding of a divine revelation is crucially important in creating something that we can all relate to. And that's what I'm trying to do with this presentation today, so I'm going to take it away and first give you an idea of what I'm going to do. I will be speaking about Islam as an entangled tradition first, and trying to lay out the idea of engaging with the other. And I ask you to bear with me because this is going to take a while to sort of contextualize what I'm trying to come from. And then the next step for me is to learn from the other. And I'm going to talk about the methodological questions. After that, we will be going into Hermann Cohen's work on the religion of reason from the Sources of Judaism. Particularly, I'm going to look at the issue to transform the Nebenmensch zum Mitmenschen. The human who stands next to me becomes a fellow human. And in that regard, there is the issue of religious love that Cohen raises, and I want to extrapolate how Islamic thinking can tackle that. So, and I will conclude with some remarks. So, Islam as an entangled tradition, I think this is something really not new. It's not a novelty. And I'm trying to emphasize that time and again. Historically speaking, the way how Islamic thought has emerged was always in close proximity to other cultures. And when I'm speaking about Islamic tradition, what I'm trying to conceptualize is what in time is rendered as tradition is often, but not exclusively, a reconstruction of the past in the contemporary context, shaped by prevailing questions and challenges. The comprehension and classification of tradition is thus substantially influenced by contemporary identity, current concerns, societal anxieties, and anticipations of the future. In other words, tradition can be comprehended, again, not exclusively, as a set of multi-layered narratives that are actively sifted and compartmentalized to identify those specific strains that address the present day. What I'm really trying to emphasize is theology is contextual. Theology is always coming from a very specific point of departure. It doesn't stay there necessarily, as I'm always trying to engage with my students. Interestingly enough, the first thing theologians do is always go back in time, right? But don't stay there. Come back to the present, but also say something about the future. So we are operating in different timelines all the time, and we are also operating in different geographies. But we are always also connected to a specific context from where we are departing. To keep that in mind, I'm also trying to for instance, say and emphasize, I know very little about the Southeast Asian context where the vast majority of Muslim population in the world lives today. I don't speak any of the languages. I don't have any idea, roughly I do from reading the newspapers, but I don't have much idea about what's going on in the societal issues, what are the current conflicts. So I don't feel I do have the expertise to say something that would probably resonate with the people over there. So the questions that I have arise from a very specific context. And the same is also probably true for them. They might feel the same way, that they are not going to be able to speak about issues that are related to me in my environment. I just want to be cognizant about these issues. What I'm trying to sketch here is essentially, I depart from this context, and there is a personal disposition. So when I'm doing theology, I'm doing it based on the questions that interest me. I'm not trying to represent the entire field. I'm not trying to say what I'm doing today is how Islamic theology should be thought and practiced exclusively. It is one rendition, one possible iteration of how Islamic theology can be pursued. There are other reiterations, and it's perfectly legitimate to have each way represented in the field. All I'm sort of trying to claim is that this is also one legitimate way to think about Islam today. And I'm connecting this with the idea of a certain willingness to learn and relate. And I'm also, and this is something that I have learned from the engagement with my Christian colleagues, a sense of epistemic humility. There is essentially a point where I will sort of, confront certain epistic borders that I can't surpass. I have to accept that fact, right? So that gives me the idea that I'm trying and striving to understand, but there's also a moment where I may not be. And this kind of leads me to the idea of that the discourse, I do not necessarily like the word dialogue. This is one thing that I really, because I find this is my limited personal experience. Every time I was engaged in dialogue, it became only a surface level engagement. It never went too far. I never just got to know the other person, never got into a moment where I really intimately understood what the person was trying to say. So I'm speaking about discourse. The discourse can fail, right? I do have to sort of comprehend that notion that despite my sincere understandings and intentions, there might be a point that we do not agree, and that's perfectly fine. I actually, as a matter of fact, think that's part of the divine design, so that instance also stays and the differences remain amongst each other. One thing that hasn't made it onto the slide, but that's very important for me, is to speak about asymmetries in the current context of developing. Frank mentioned that Islamic theology in Germany, which is a very new development, roughly 15 years old, and now we have 7 campuses throughout Germany where Islamic theology is part of the university landscape. The difficulties that we encounter is we are entering a space that has been, and this is an observation, not an accusation, has been shaped by Christian theologies for a better part of 2 centuries. When I speak of revelation, I mean something very different than what you, as Christian colleagues, for instance, might understand by revelation. So I do always have to have a sort of double-edged translation movement. I have to first, explain what I mean by revelation towards the other, and then I have to translate it back inside. So but I am dependent on the other to go with me, right? If I can't do it by myself, or there was going to be no conversation between each other. So that asymmetry exists, and we need to be mindful of it. At the same time, however, I'm also urging my colleagues, Muslim colleagues and Muslim students, to have a deep sense of familiarity with the other. So which means, as much as I'm asking the Christian colleagues to understand what revelation means in Muslim terms, I'm also asking my students to understand what revelation means in Christian terms. And only if that happens, which is a sophisticated approach, I'm aware of it, but only if that happens, we really can speak to one another and understand one another what we actually mean. I have been attending conferences on Trinity, and I have come to the point where I intellectually can appreciate what Trinity is trying to say. A relational idea of relating between the divine and the world, right? And Muslim thought here and there has similar concepts when they're trying to explain how the divine actually acts in the world, right? Without knowing that it goes somewhat close to what Trinity is trying to do. But there is also a point where you realize this doesn't go through the barrier of my heart, my mind. It doesn't speak and resonate to me in the way it does someone who is Christian. But I can intellectually comprehend and intellectually appreciate what Trinity is trying to do. And sometimes even see it's not that far off from what I'm trying to do in my culture, in my tradition. Speaking of that, just to sort of bring everything together, this line of thought that I'm trying to present here operates as a continuation of approaches within the Muslim intellectual tradition, which acknowledges a fundamental tension between contextual and atemporal modes of interpreting Islam, a tension that must be negotiated anew by each generation. This perspective doesn't lean entirely towards a contextual nor an atemporal interpretation, refusing to favor one approach to Islam over the other. So I'm not just living in the past. I'm not just living in the past geographies or in the past times with regard to Islam. I'm living in the context today. But I have to take into account the past Islam and the past geographies and the past interpretations of Islam. Instead, it affirms that the Muslim tradition carries a profound appreciation for ambiguity that is intrinsically interwoven with the thought patterns and structures of diverse cultures, and that it derives its openness and interconnectedness not solely from religious sources. Rather, this capacity is understood as a vital self-perception of humanity, collectively seeking to understand and interpret the world. I mean, looking into the translation movement of the Muslim era where Greek and Syriac texts have been translated into Arabic, seeing how Muslim authors are engaging with the concepts of Greek philosophy, the way how they are not only preserving but also thinking these things forward, and then how it's tunneled throughout the history and how it's then sort of translated and transferred to other parts of Europe. It shows time and again this is not an endeavor that one culture or one religious denomination is doing by itself. I think, critically speaking, we do not appreciate entirely the level of familiarity that past scholars had with one another. We do not appreciate the level of familiarity Maimonides had with Ghazali and vice versa, and Muslim scholars like Al-Bikai with Hebrew texts and Israeliyat. We are not there, interestingly enough and paradoxically enough, because we have so much more resources available, but we, I don't think, have the same level of appreciation and familiarity with the thought of the other. So that is essentially the idea, methodologically speaking, what I'm trying to. Again, nothing new. It is trying to reinvigorate something that happened in the past, was very vivid and shaped Muslim thinking decisively, and has given it sort of color. Now, going over to learning from the other, and this is a critical injection that I'm trying to introduce. I believe, and I have a feeling, this is of course, like, I haven't done empirical studies on this, but contemporary Islamic discourse, if I may say, the way how I receive it and read it, is often so consumed by the strict delineation between what is deemed Islamic and what is not, that it frequently overlooks how Muslim individuals and societies historically came to be in the world. In other words, we're so obsessed with ourselves and our identities that we lost track of the way how Muslims acted in the world in the past. I do understand that there is much reason, legitimate reason, to think about the recent past and the change and the structures and ruptures it created in the world. But I also want to go and at least have represented something that goes beyond it. Historically, and that's the reason why, again, going back, Islamic civilization flourished precisely by engaging thoroughly and sincerely with others, listening to, learning from, and incorporating external insights and wisdoms into their own intellectual fabric. A core overarching goal of this research is to reinvigorate this culture of learning and constructive entanglement with one's immediate contextual environment. The one thing that we are asked in Germany, specifically as Muslim scholars of Islam, of Islamic theology, is addressing contemporary issues. And if we are asked to address contemporary issues, we can't confine our research to history alone. If it is to function as more than a historical science, it cannot avoid engaging with contemporary challenges and systematic questions. So that's essentially the challenge that we are facing, that we are having to live up to. Now, again, in the vein of being contextual, for Islamic theology in Germany, and by extension, one might say within the Western world, the framework for conceptualizing the contemporary context is set, again, not exclusively, but predominantly by those discourses resulting from historical, socio-cultural, intellectual interdependence, in my case, with Germany and Europe. That is part of the reason why I'm engaging with Jewish thought, but it was an integral part of Germany's intellectual development in the past. What I'm also trying to say is that this project is not merely descriptive. It proposes an active approach that openly embraces the broader monotheistic heritage, seeking both its revitalization and its continued relevance today. While Muslim thought should certainly not restrict its engagement to the monotheistic tradition alone, we must begin somewhere, and that's the pragmatic point of my departure. Somewhere, I have limited time, I have limited resources, I'm not going to be able to do all of it. So I have to crack the door open, and the first person going through the wall always gets a bloody nose. I accept that, that's okay. So I have to start somewhere, because people will always criticize me. Why the Jewish thinkers? Why Jewish thought? Don't we have enough material in our past to engage with? Absolutely true. I'm just one person among many, and I'm interested in this, so you can take it up from somewhere else. It is both prudent and practical to first demonstrate how this intellectual receptivity can be exercised by looking into the immediate environment. So I am looking into my immediate environment that surrounds me, both, not just intellectually, but also emotionally. What I'm now proposing, this was the long methodological framing. Thank you for bearing with me. What I'm now proposing is to employ the works of German Jewish thinkers as exemplars to illuminate discursive possibilities for 21st century Islamic theology. And there are two things that I want to talk about more in details. One thing is like, why do I choose this? So there is the issue of qualitative dimensions. If you look at the Quran, you will see a density of references to Judaism and to the Israel. The role of the Israeliyat, that is sort of a genre, a literary genre in Muslim thought, where the origins, the destination is coming from Hebrew sources. They're called Israeliyat in the plural. The mutual intellectual influences throughout history between Jews and Muslims, and I would even go as far as to say co-production, like where Muslims and Jews co-produced. And at this point, I also have to include, of course, Christians. It's just like, because I'm looking at Hermann Cohen, I'm trying to lay out that idea. So aside from the qualitative dimensions, there's also the notion of structural dimensions, and that brings me sort of to modernity. So why German Jewish thought in particular in that sort of framework? I believe, and this has built upon an empirical work that I carried out with a colleague of mine, a sociologist, who happens to be my wife. We came to the point, 2 kids, 2 careers, we don't see each other that often, so we suggested, why don't we just write something together and work something together? Little I know, it was her writing me, attending the sessions where she wrote, and I was sort of the person who inserted some ideas once in a while. I carried out the empirical research, although I'm not the sociologist. But we beautifully woven it together, it worked somehow. What we did is we asked Muslim scholars, we called them intellectuals for lack of a better word, how they identify. and specifically in Germany. So we interviewed about 20 Muslim scholars. And interestingly enough, something I expected they will relate to the Holocaust in one way or the other. What I did not expect, to my surprise, is that they related to the pre-Holocaust German Jewish time, and specifically hooked on to the sort of rise of anti-Semitism, the exclusion of Jews, the emancipation of Jews, or its failure, the assimilation, all the questions that are related to that. And they said they had very familiar insights into that history. And that was bewildering and fascinating at the same time. So they, not that using the catchy phrase, the Muslims are the new Jews, we are speaking about structural similarities, right? So there is an existential framework characterized by a religious community, navigating a minority position amidst the systematic demands of a majority culture. It's interesting to see the Wissenschaft des Judentums that emerged in the 19th century and created an understanding of Judaism was largely infused by Christian colleagues who wanted to have somebody to talk to at the academic level. So the idea is to find someone who can sort of introduce the sources and the ideas of Judaism, not just like within the community, but also outside. Theology, I think it was said yesterday, it's a beautiful concept to sort of engage with the other. You're not only engaging with the community, you're engaging with the other and trying to explain things. So there are very interesting similarities to Muslim and Islamic theology today. Again, many Christian colleagues introduced, supported the idea and endorsed the idea of Islamic theology being established at the university level because they wanted to have Muslim theologians be able to speak to audiences in the university, right? So there are similarities. But at the same time, there's a common space of experience marked by dynamics of social inclusion and exclusion. So we speak about insiders and outsiders at the same time, right? As well as the projection of otherness, the Jews to be the eternal other to society, as much as today othering Muslims, in not just in Germany, of course, is also something that shows you there is similarities that you can actually tap into. However, doing all of this, I'm also aware of the fact that there are conceptual ambiguities. What does it mean to characterize a specific intellectual framework as Jewish or Muslim? I had conversations with Jewish scholars over the issue if Walter Benjamin can be considered a Jewish thinker or not. And why so, if yes, and why not, if not. So I am, of course, not in any position to define who is considered to be Jewish or not. I can only relate to the debates that's happening within Judaism, as much as I can relate to the debates that are happening in Islam. But the question that has to be raised is essentially, is it permissible to reduce authors to their affiliation with a plural religious tradition, sometimes even going against their own personal self-understanding, and retroactively cast them as Jewish or Muslim thinkers? It's at least an issue that I want to keep in mind when I'm talking about Jewish thought, and I'm not trying to be transgressive and include people who probably would have issues to be seen in that way, although they hail from a Jewish family in one way or the other. So. Now, off to Hermann Cohen. From the Nebenmensch to the Mitmensch. Rather than retreating into isolation or capitulating to total assimilation, modern Jewish philosophers used the impasse to redefine the parameters of belonging. They drew upon the universal potential for their own tradition to show how a distinct identity and universal citizenship could coexist. And this is exactly Hermann Cohen's project. It emerged as a powerful response to this tension by anchoring the defense of Jewish heritage in universal human reason rather than dogmatic isolation. Cohen argued that preserving religious traditions serves the broader moral education of humanity. That's sort of a really steep approach that Cohen takes, and he is, of course, criticized for it quite heavily. In his work, Deutschtum und Judentum, Cohen writes, the mediator between God and humans is the human capacity to reason. As a new Kantian, that is essentially where he's departing from. It sets the limitations of what he's trying to do at the same time. Accordingly, his magnum opus, Religion of Reason, out of the Sources of Judaism, is explicitly programmatic. Cohen's methodology bridges modern ethical ideas with classical Jewish sources to address the socio-economic and political crises of his era. He sought to prove that a direct continuity exists between traditional Jewish faith and modern ethical worldview, positioning Jewish heritage as an exemplar for the moral education of modern society. In the 8th chapter of his major work, Cohen explores the transition from the individual to the community by distinguishing between two types of human relationships. The Nebenmensch is the adjacent human, the default state where humans view others merely as elements in a series, remaining largely indifferent to their well-being. So the adjacent human is someone I bump into, I know in a sense, but I don't really know in a deep sense. I do not relate to the person in a way that I'm concerned with the well-being of the other. Now, Cohen says that is a status that needs to be overcome. I have to create a Mitmensch, a fellow human being, out of that adjacent human being who's an abstract figure. And he concedes that there is a relationship predicated on love and divine commandment, actively transforming the other into a fellow human being. Now, the interesting thing there is that for Cohen, bridging this gap between a Nebenmensch and a Mitmensch is an urgent ethical task. As a Kantian, he always talks about task, an obligation, a responsibility, and as a Muslim, I really like that. It resonates well with my thinking. And he says it's rooted in compassion, in Mitleid, with the other. He identifies, and that's now an interesting thing, poverty as the primary manifestation of human suffering in his day and age. Because the social self is implicitly complicit in the suffering of the poor, he says, an individual can only become an authentic ethical subject, an I, by recognizing the suffering alongside the poor, who represents the ultimate other. So without me understanding how the other actually suffers, I cannot become I. And I need to do that. I need to sort of transgress and go over and understand the suffering. Monotheism, Cohen argues, bears the unique responsibility to elevate the stranger, the adjacent human being, into a fellow human being, because monotheism alone is capable of doing that. And in that he sees the differentiation with philosophy or the ancient Greek myth. He says that monotheism is capable of something that philosophy essentially is not. As Micha Brumlik notes, Cohen's religion of reason is ultimately, therefore, a universalist ethics of humanity refined through co-suffering. Cohen points out that God enters into a correlation with humanity only when humans succeed in recognizing the Nebenmensch as a true Mitmensch. So that is the bar that we have to overcome. Ultimately, while Cohen's philosophy does not explain why suffering exists, it offers a vital ethical insight. Suffering makes co-suffering possible, thereby actualizing the true potential of humanity. Can you follow me so far? Lovely. Here comes the problem of religious love that Cohen introduces. He conceptualizes religious love as a distinct phenomenon, fundamentally different from both romantic and aesthetic love, eros. Because he doesn't view love as an anthropological given, he establishes its foundation through a triadic structure: the love of God, love for God, and love among humans. Crucially, Cohen subverts traditional monotheistic assumptions. Instead of love originating in God and emanating down to humanity, he argues that love for God and for one's fellow human is the prerequisite through which the divine love is first revealed. Now that changes everything. A concept entirely foreign to ancient myths. But, if you may notice, also very close to Christian thinking, right? And it is, again, a point where you see, obviously, Cohen's religion of reason is also establishing itself in a particular intellectual environment. that of Christianity of the 19th and 20th century. Cohen is tasked by the Christian colleagues to respond to urgent questions. And Cohen is trying to incorporate those calls into his thinking, right? And it becomes evident in this point that I already talked about, that love is described by Cohen as springing from the human heart, yet he questions the conventional limits of human affection, addressing the skepticism that genuine love is reserved only for partners or offspring, making love for a stranger a mere metaphor. Cohen says decisively, once love manifests as concrete compassion, it ceases to be a metaphor and becomes an undeniable reality. So there's almost a radical linkage arguing that empathetic compassion generates an absolute, undeniable love for the other. It's a rare theoretical innovation, and at the same time, it invites skepticism. That's the point where I, sort of from a Muslim point of view, come in. There is, in my understanding, first of all, a phenomenological gap. The claim that we can seamlessly love any fellow human is difficult to validate in practice. All experience tells me it's a thing God can do. Let me put it this way. It's a type of love that God can execute. I have, if history is any indication, if my life experience is any indication, difficulties to sign on to that. I just look at it from my own personal view. I like some people in this room. I may love some people in this room. Definitely, I can't extend it to everyone. No offense. It's just the factual thing that I experience. There is, and that is something I'm concerned with, is the psychological overreach. I think this type of love risks sliding into an idealism that overburdens human emotional capacity. And I believe human affection is naturally hierarchical, bounded by our psychological limits. We just can't love that in that way, abundantly, unconditionally. And there is essentially a limit to what we can do. And if I tell people that it's okay to be that way, I hope that I can alleviate a certain suffering, a pain that may incur if people realize there is an understanding, a bar is being raised that I never will be able to actually clinch. And finally, it is highly questionable whether a subject can cultivate love for an abstract stranger with the same intensity reserved for family or close friends. And setting such an uncompromising standard invites systematic frustration in everyday life, is what I'm trying to sort of point out. So what do we do with this in terms of the conclusion? Am I doing okay with time, Frank? Okay. Islamic thought frequently emphasizes the profound obligation and responsibility Muslims bear toward the created order, encompassing not only humanity but animals, nature, and the cosmos as a whole. However, a mandate for undifferentiated love toward all of creation risks ignoring the reality of human nature, which naturally differentiates and indeed sometimes even discriminates regarding proximity, passion, and affection. Human capacity is structured to feel far greater love for specific individuals within an immediate environment than for others, extending the same passion and intensity felt for an intimate circle to the world at large seems, in my understanding, overwhelming. Yet, while equal affection cannot be extended to all, an unbending commitment and ethical responsibility to the other remains undeniable under any circumstances. So it's important to me to emphasize that even if I can love in that way, how I love people close to me, I still have a connection, I still have a sense of obligation, I still have a sense of responsibility. I still don't see myself being disconnected from humanity or the other. It just sort of resonates in a rank below what I would call love and affection to others. But it still exists and it's a powerful linkage. I do not want to deny it. Obviously not. This distinction between emotional intimacy and ethical duty, in my opinion, is crucially important. It exemplifies a paradigm that has become increasingly prominent in contemporary Islamic discourse, actually. On the one hand, the principle of wasatiyya, by seeking a middle path and avoiding extremes. Of course, Aristotle and Mesotes will ring a bell, and that's part of the reason why Aristotle was received so deliberately in Muslim culture, because it resonates with the own understanding. And this approach establishes a sustainable equilibrium in one's outlook and engagement with the world. Very recently, we can see in Al-Azhar in Cairo, a new sort of fiqh emerging, new Islamic legal reasoning emerging called fiqh al-waqi, which means the fiqh, the reasoning of the context of what is happening right now, and trying to understand, trying to balance essentially that what I said in the beginning, to look into the context, try to understand the issues and questions and challenges each society and individual might have from out the context, but also to put it in a relationship where it tries to reach an equilibrium and considers the other issues. Sorry, I haven't clicked there, but Islamic tradition has historically maintained a profound emphasis, and this is now the first point that Cohen raises that I want to tackle. So Cohen has identified and said the issue of my time, the one pressing issue, is essentially poverty and social injustices. Nothing else. You want to talk ethically, you want to claim that you have a sort of legitimacy to speak in the name on behalf of religion ethically, then you cannot ignore the fact of suffering, you cannot ignore the fact of social injustice, you cannot ignore the fact of poverty. And I believe, yes, Islamic tradition, if I'm now learning from Cohen, historically maintained a profound emphasis on poverty alleviation and social justice. However, and this is now the critical question I'm asking myself after reading Cohen, one could argue that this was merely one priority among many, and one that occasionally receded in the face of more immediate pressing dilemmas. This is particularly evident in the modern era, where the Muslim world has been predominantly consumed by crises of legitimacy. My mom is calling. I'm sorry. I can't. I'm going to have a tough talk with my mom afterwards. What's new? It's all the women in my life. It's usually either my mom calling, my mother calling, or my daughter calling. Hey, my mom, my wife, or my daughter. So my mom started. 10 minutes later, my wife will call, and probably during the Q&A, my daughter is going to call me. I apologize in advance. I guess I have to go somewhere and buy them all kinds of nice gifts. So Muslim world is consumed by crises of legitimacy, authenticity, and authority. And if I look into the way how Hermann Cohen reframes the entire ethical landscape, elevating the question of poverty and social justice with such ferocity and urgency that all the other concerns are effectively deprioritized, it really makes me think, if committing to learning from the other, don't we have to ask ourselves whether such a bold paradigmatic shift would be necessary for Muslim thought today? And it would lead, essentially, such a transition would lead an outlook that transcends strictly communal concerns, empowering Muslims to shift their dynamic from merely being the other to actively exercising agency for the other. Thank you.